Good afternoon. I'll call to order the March 11th meeting of the Minneapolis City Planning Commission. My name is Matt Brown. I serve as president of the commission. I'm joined today by Commissioners Kronzer, Lupke, Pierce, Weezy, Coleman, Rockwell, and Schrader. At this time, I'll ask that you silence any mobile devices, and we can get started with our meeting. First item of business is to approve the actions from the February 25th meeting. Commissioners may have a motion to approve those actions. We have a motion and a second. All in favor? Aye. That motion carries. Next, we will organize the agenda. You can find hard copies of the agenda in the hallway. We'll determine which items will be considered on consent, which we'll discuss, and which will be continued to another meeting. So starting at the top of the agenda, item 1 is the Ramsey Street Northeast vacation. That item will be continued to the April 29th meeting, if anyone is here for that. Item 2 is at 3811 Minnehaha Avenue. That is a rezoning from R1A to R2B. Is anyone wishing to speak in opposition to or modify the staff recommendation on item 2? Seeing no one, we'll put item 2 on consent. Item 3 is at 3017, 3021, and 3025 East Calhoun Parkway. Several applications for a new multifamily building at that location. That item will be continued to the March 25th meeting. If anyone is here for that, that will be considered on March 25th. Item 4 is Tiara Encantada, Hiawatha at 4012 and 4016 Minnehaha Avenue. Conditional use permit, variance, site plan review for a childcare facility. Is anyone wishing to speak in opposition to or modify the staff recommendation on item 4? We have someone here, so we'll discuss item 4. Item 5 is the 1501 Johnson Street Apartments at 1501 Johnson Street Northeast. We'll discuss item 5 if anyone is here for that. Item 6 is Block 1 Residential at 740 South 4th Street. A few applications for a new residential building at that location. Is anyone wishing to speak in opposition to or modify the staff recommendation on item 6? So we have someone here for that, so we can discuss item 6. And item 7 is L&H Station Phase 2 at 2225 East Lake Street. Several applications for multifamily buildings at that location. Is anyone here to speak in opposition to or modify the staff recommendation on item 7? Item 7, is anyone here? Seeing no one, we'll put item 7 on consent. So our agenda as amended is as follows. Items 2 and 7 will be considered on consent. We'll discuss items 4, 5, and 6. Item 1 will be continued to the April 29th meeting. Item 3 will be continued to the March 25th meeting. May I have a motion to approve the agenda as amended?
So moved.
We have a motion and a second. All in favor?
Aye.
That motion carries. Next, may I have a motion to continue item 1 to the April 29th meeting?
So moved.
We have a motion and a second. We have a motion and a second to continue item 1 to April 29th. All in favor?
Aye.
And that motion carries. Next, may I have a motion to continue item 3 to the March 25th meeting? We have a motion and a second. All in favor?
Aye.
And that motion carries. Next, I will open the public hearing for the items on the consent agenda. Again, that's items 2 and 7. Is anyone here for either item 2 or 7? Seeing no one, I'll close the public hearing and may have a motion to approve the consent agenda. We have a motion. Is there a second? We have a motion and a second. All in favor?
Aye.
That motion carries. The consent agenda is approved. Moving on to our items for discussion, we'll start with item 4. Let's see. Staff is Ms. Smith. Ms. Wallace.
Good evening, Commissioners. The site before you is 4012 and 4016 Minnehaha. This area is located south of 40th and along Minnehaha. The site itself is zoned commercial and is occupied by a single-family home and a vacant lot, which has been used as an urban farm, and there is commercial zoning on either side and an alley to the west. Here's the site. The applicant has proposed to construct a new 3-story commercial building that would be used as a childcare center. The childcare center would contain approximately 15,000 square feet of gross floor area, although it would also contain a basement level. There would be approximately 17 classrooms to enroll 260 students. The applicant has proposed 4 off-street parking spaces that would be accessed off the alley. A childcare center of this size does have a requirement for 30 parking spaces, so the applicant has applied for both a variance to reduce the number of parking spaces and a maneuvering variance to allow maneuvering in the alley, although that parking would be for staff only. There are some significant constraints to the site which are worth noting. So the site itself is 12,000 square feet. The building has a 5,000 square foot footprint. The state has certain requirements for size of play yards that are required. So the minimum size is 2,500 square feet, and the applicant is proposing 3,300 square feet. And then in order to provide, basically the site would not be, does not have enough space to both provide the required parking and the play yard and to have a building of a suitable size. So the applicant has indicated this is a Spanish immersion childcare center, and many of the staff for the childcare center live within the city limits of Minneapolis. The site is very well connected to public transit. It's within half a mile of the Blue Line light rail station and is on 3 bus routes, including the 7, 9, and 23. The applicant has another site in northeast Minneapolis that is a similar size and configuration with 4 off-street parking spaces, and has indicated that that works well on that site. They would be applying for 2 off-street drop-off locations along Minnehaha Avenue, and we've begun the preliminary conversation with Public Works about that, but it seems like that would be supported by Public Works staff. The building itself, if you'll look closely at the upper left-hand corner of this screen, there some of the renderings aren't very clear, but the applicant has provided these photos to show the proposed exterior materials, which would be brick, metal panel, and a wood panel siding. Staff is recommending approval of all the applications with several conditions, including ensuring that the parking is for staff only, some changes to the facade that would allow the building to better meet site plan review standards, especially in terms of the vertical orientation of windows. And the building is showing ephes as a material for the cornice element. The applicant has provided this 5-foot-tall parapet wall, which is, they have indicated is because of concerns about snow drifting on neighboring buildings, although it is not a requirement of the building code, and staff had encouraged them to put in a cornice type element, and that is proposed to be ephes on the plan, so that would have to be changed. And I think that's about it, and I will stand for questions.
Right, Commissioner Lukey-Peter.
Yes, Lindsay, just a quick question. It calls for stucco finish on the sides and back. Is that really stucco or is it cement board? And if it's cement paneling, does that exceed the material requirement, or is it, where are we at percentage-wise? I believe it. I mean, it shows stucco on all the plans, so I haven't been informed that it's anything other than stucco, and it's not exceeding the 75%, which is allowed for stucco. And then my other question was just related to the building itself. My packet, the plans didn't come out very clear per floor. Is it intended to be for childcare on all 3 levels, or is it something else on the uppermost floor?
It would all be used for childcare and then their officing, and then the site to the here. I guess we could go through the plans. I mean, there's some mechanical, but most of it is used for classrooms.
Because I would be curious if the architect is here tonight. I was under the impression that daycare usage, locating children on the 3rd floor, had certain other requirements that ordinarily would be prohibited. So I just wanted to see if that was at all addressed. But
I had not been aware of that. But I will show you the site plan. That this building immediately to the north, 4008 Minnehaha, is also owned by the same applicant. So that currently has a retail space on the ground floor, but the intention is for that whole building to be used as administrative offices. There's also a garage and parking in the back that would potentially be used in concurrence with the site.
Thank you.
Any further questions of staff? Hearing none, I'll open the public hearing on this item. I'd like to ask the applicant, or at least give the applicant an opportunity to speak first if anyone is here on behalf of the applicant. See if there's anything you'd like to add to the staff presentation. Please come to the microphone and state your name and address for the record.
Hello, my name is Karina Zumba. I am the Chief Operating Officer for Tiara Encantada. What you heard is correct. We are hoping to get those variances approved from you guys. I don't know if you guys have any questions for me.
All right, and commissioners, are there any questions of the applicant? Commissioner Sweezy, did you have a question there? Oh, no. All right. I don't think we have any questions at the moment.
All right.
So if that's the case, we can move on to some other speakers. And I know we have at least one person who'd like to speak on this item. So please come to the microphone, state your name and address for the record.
Hi, my name is Ellen Schmitz, and my address is 3415 East 40th Street. I live right around the corner from the proposed site of the building. And I just want to say I don't have a concern that a daycare is going in there. I do have a concern, however, as do some of my other neighbors who have emailed in, with the size of the daycare. We are now in an area that has been inundated with really awesome new restaurants and shopping, and that has caused an influx of people problems with parking on 40th Street itself. I am concerned about the size of this because, as you know, 260 proposed children and the Minnesota state law related to children to teacher ratio do not equal 4 parking spots. That would mean to me that the staff would have to park somewhere. The children's parents would have to park somewhere. And so there's a concern amongst all of the neighbors that live on 40th Street that has not been duly addressed by the city of Minneapolis with the plans to bring in all this great revitalization to this neighborhood. So that is my primary concern. And additionally, the size, 4 or 3 stories, is kind of a massive size for a building going in on that block. And looking at the design of it, it doesn't fit in with the design of this neighborhood. I know this has probably already been decided and approved, so I'm just expressing my concern around that. But primarily, I would really like to stress that we need to address the parking. If this is going in, as to the extent it's going in and the size that it's going to be, the city of Minneapolis needs to help the residents who live on 40th Street in that area with some kind of solution for parking. I am proposing permit parking so that the residents have their spots and they don't have to battle with people constantly to have a spot. And I think that would be only a fair solution if we're accommodating these larger places that provide lots of people with some kind of entertainment or some sort of place for their child to go to school. We need to be considered as well. This is the neighborhood that I personally have lived in for 25 years. My husband's been here for 33 years, and we've taken good care of our neighborhood, and we'd like the city to respect that as well. So that is my concern. I'd like to understand how we can go about getting permit parking for the neighbors to make sure that we are accounted for in this consideration as well.
All right, thank you. And is there anyone else who would like to speak on this item? Yes, and please come to the microphone, state your name and address for the record.
My name is Doug Weber. I live at 4029 Snelling, which is directly across the alley from the proposed development. I'd just like to echo my neighbor's concerns about the parking situation. While Snelling Avenue seems to have readily available parking on it, I am a bit worried about the size of the building with only 4 spaces available when 30 is what's required. So if anything, I think maybe a little bit more discussion on the whole situation. with the 4 parking spaces, which would be directly across the alley from our garage, what the difficulties would be during rush hour with parking, and cars who, even though they may not be parking to stay for the day, but to perhaps drop children off in the alley, because it just seems logical that people would probably try and do that, given the fact that I have a 1-year-old daughter who currently attends the Hardeen Academy, which is right up the street, about 2 blocks away, and peak drop-off hours are insanely difficult to find a spot to stop on busy Minnehaha Avenue. So perhaps just a little bit more discussion on the parking situation here before we move forward to approve it. Thank you.
Thank you. And is there anyone else who would like to speak on this item? Yes, and please state your name and address for the record.
Hi, Heather Pressler. I live at 3413 East 40th Street. And I would just like to know, with the ordinances on size, like, why is there going to be an exception, such a significant exception for this building?
All right. And is there anyone else who would like to speak? All right. Yes, and please come to the microphone, state your name and address for the record.
Hello, my name is Heather Whelan. I live at 4012 Snelling Avenue, directly 1 block behind the proposed site. I echo the concerns of my neighbors, but I also wanted to add that there's a lot of traffic on Minnehaha and the 2 drop-off spots, which I assume would be primarily for parent drop-off and pickup. And I know what it's like to get a child out of daycare, especially an infant, and load them back into the car. It's not really a brief drop-off, and if there's only 2 spots, I just really can see that there would be a lot of additional cars kind of circling the block and backing up. Also, hopefully there's pedestrian drop-off and pickup, which we do see at other daycares nearby, but those of us that need to use our vehicle from time to time are not going to be ready for the extra pedestrian traffic too. So I think maybe that's, if there were a few more drop-off spots or a little bit more accommodation, that would be helpful for safety. So,
All right.
thank you.
Thank you. And is there anyone else? Commissioner Lupie here, you have a question?
Yeah, I did have a question. So is the architect for the building available at all? Is it present? No? Maybe you can answer the question. So the question that I have is related to, it's been a while since I've had to deal with educational design, but it seems to me as though, is the building sprinklered and have a full fire panel that's going to be provided, or?
Yep.
Okay.
Okay, please come to the microphone just so it's picked up on the audio.
Yes, it will. It's a license requirement, so with the Minnesota Department of Human Services, so it will be.
Okay, super.
Yep.
Because I was just wondering, because I'm not used to seeing daycares with children on a 3rd floor, but I think that would be a lot. Hopefully your architects looked into that in terms of not being on the level of discharge for egress in case of a fire emergency. So just wanted to check and see if that was even a possibility. So
Yeah.
thank you.
Okay. And could I add just something about the parking? We have a location in the Wyndham neighborhood where there's the building is similar to what we're proposing for Minnehaha. So it's also it's a 2-story building where about 210 children attend daily. So, and initially there was a concern about parking and a lot of traffic, but I just wanted to say that it hasn't been. That we've never gotten complaints from neighborhoods about them not being able to access their homes or things like that. So, and my understanding is that if the city approves that, those spots, in the alley will mainly be used for staff, which will mean that their cars will be parked there the entire day, and there won't be obstruction in the alley for neighbors that might have cars in the alley. Thanks.
And Commissioner Coleman.
Yes, question for the applicant.
Yeah.
I guess I'm not as concerned about the staff parking. I do believe that you and staff have probably looked into that, and if you feel it's adequate, I'm willing to go with that. It's the drop-off, 2 spaces. So maybe you can explain to me the other daycare that you run, how that drop-off happens. Is it on the street? Or
Yeah.
is it off the street?
It's
How much space does it take, and do people stack up out into the street?
So for the location where I'm at daily, Wentworth Avenue, it tends to be a busy street too because there's the school, the elementary school, Wyndham, just across from us. So parents usually park on the street and do a quick drop off. Same thing for pickup. So it's I would say parents mostly don't use the parking lot, although we have one and they're okay to use it. It's mainly off street parking that they use to do the drop off and pickup.
And if I could, the how big is the drop-off space there? Is there a dedicated drop-off space?
There is. I'm not sure about the exact measure, but it takes about the whole front of our building for drop-off. I can't tell you how big of the space it is. Sorry.
And maybe if I could have staff respond to that question. So are the two drop-off spaces here, how did you come to that being adequate?
The minimum parking requirement for a childcare center is based on the number of classrooms, which is the 30 spaces that we discussed earlier, plus 2 drop-off spaces. So that's kind of the baseline for childcare centers. It's also the baseline for like an adult daycare center. You know, the 2 drop-off spaces is what is typically in the zoning code for these types of uses.
Thank you.
Commissioner Rockwell.
Sorry, Lindsay rushed out there. Is the assumption, you may not know, but it's the assumption that within the 30 parking spaces required for the site, it's based on the number of kids, presumably?
It's based on the square footage.
Based on the square footage, okay. And is the idea, do you know the intent behind the number, whether that's based, the number of off-street parking is based on staff or parent drop-off? Or you don't, or don't we know?
I think it's both, and I would assume that the number of parking spaces would be more related to staff, since parents aren't usually parking for any length of time.
Okay. But the 2 parking spaces in front is constant regardless of the number of kids.
As the minimum parking requirement, yeah.
Okay, so that's minimum if you've got a daycare with 12 kids or a daycare with 2,000 kids.
Yes.
Cool.
Commissioner Schrader.
Just actually to follow up on that, it's if we're reducing how much parking is there for parents, I would assume some of that would be used for drop-off. I'm familiar with their place on Wentworth, and that's kind of a constant turnover. Was there some consideration if you always have to have 2, but you're getting rid of the other parking, that there would be more drop-off, or how was that kind of factored in?
So the applicant had indicated that a lot of their staff is local and is likely to be taking public transit. And with the constraints of the site, staff was particularly concerned about drop-off pickup being located off of the alley and potential impacts of that on neighboring residents. And so the only other option for them to have drop-off on site that wasn't accessed off of the alley would be on street. And, the applicant is able to request more than 2 spaces from Public Works, but that will be dependent on, Public Works approval and availability.
Thank you.
Commissioner Lukey-Peer.
So yeah, along those lines as well, because I think one of the speaker's points was well taken in that the staff ratios alone will eat up all that. So even local teachers, it's still going to probably be more than that. So I assume they're going to be parking on the street, which is totally fine. But I'm wondering, is it the applicant's onus to go to Public Works and maybe suggest more drop-off spaces? And then are the drop-off spaces just for certain hours? I assume they're not 24/7. These 2 spaces are sacrosanct to this facility. It's probably a morning and an afternoon time slot, or what's the...
I'm not sure how that typically works, but usually it will be, denoted by signs and hours if applicable. This location's open from, I think, 6:30 to 6 p.m., 6:30 a.m. to 6:30 p.m.
Okay, 'cause I guess I would I would be inclined to suggest to the applicant that they pursue maybe more than two. I mean, I think anyone dropping off a newborn baby is going to soak up at least 20 minutes in one of those spots. I mean, I'm just speaking from experience. So I would encourage that just to keep people from double parking and the neighbors from being, I think you're right to say that the alley isn't on the table in terms of drop off and pick up, but I just want to maybe suggest that isn't something I'd encourage Public Works to even consider.
Right. And Commissioners, are there any further questions? And I know the public hearing is still open, so if there's no one else who wants to speak, I will close the public hearing. And Commissioners, we have total of 4 applications before us, starting with the conditional use permit. Are there any further questions, or would someone like to start things off with a motion? Conditional use permit for height, item A. Commissioner Kronzer.
Yes, I'd like to make a motion to approve staff recommendation with the one stated condition for the conditional use permit.
So we have a motion and a second to approve item A, the conditional use permit. Is there any discussion? Hearing none, clerk, please call the roll.
Coleman. Aye. Colgill.
Aye.
Kronzer.
Aye.
Lipke-Pier.
Aye.
Rockwell.
Aye.
Schrader.
Aye.
Sweezy. Aye. 7-0.
That motion carries. Moving along to item B for the variance for minimum parking. Commissioner Kronzer.
I'd like to make a motion to approve staff recommendation to vary the minimum parking requirement with the one stated condition.
We have a motion to approve item B, the variance to reduce the minimum parking requirement with the one stated condition. Is there a second? Second. We have a motion and a second. Commissioner Sweezy.
Thank you. Just wanted to comment on this. I'll be voting against this variance. It seems to me when I look at the justification for it and what's offered as circumstances unique to the property, it's that this is too big of a thing for the space, which is a condition of created by the use of it. It says that the state of Minnesota requires a play yard of such size and all those kinds of things, and it looks to me like this is not it's not something that's unique to the property. It's just that probably something this large really does need to go somewhere else. But I think that the parking concerns are real, and that I don't think that the basis is here for a finding that that the reason for the variance are the circumstances relating to the property. To me, it seems to be what they want to put on the property. It sounds like a great project, but I'm just not sure this is the right spot.
And Commissioner Rockwell.
I actually have a question for staff. So this variance reads that we're approving a reduction to the minimum parking requirement from 30 to 4 and allowing 2 drop-off spaces to be provided in the public right-of-way. Yep. So do we, the Planning Commission, need to allow the number of spaces in the public right-of-way?
I think the way that we typically do it is because the drop-off spaces are not being allowed on site, they're kind of rolled into the parking variance and saying that they don't have to be allowed on site, which is why then there's a condition that the applicant should apply with Public Works for the drop-off locations on the street.
But if we wanted to, do we need to provide, maybe you answered this, do we need to provide the ability for the applicant to apply for more than 2, like 4?
Yeah, I think that that's reasonable, that if you're not comfortable with the parking variance unless they get some other number of on-street drop-off spaces approved, then you could change that condition to have it be some other number than 2.
So I think what you're saying, though, too, is if we approve this variance as is with the condition worded the way it is, they could apply for 4 spaces. We're only requiring that they apply for 2, but it would be possible. We're not limiting them to 2 spaces. I think Commissioner Rockwell is that.
Because it's funny because we're allowing them to, but by allowing them to, we're also allowing them That seems a little, I guess I would offer.
We could,
friendly
I
amendment.
think, yeah, and maybe it wouldn't hurt to make it a formal amendment if you wish to do so, but if we wanted to strengthen that.
Yeah.
And, yeah, and commissioners, you could, I think this wording is a little loose, so you could
Right.
potentially make it that they have to be approved, I suppose.
All right. And
I would ask Commissioner Kronzer if you'd consider a friendly amendment to change the wording of the recommended motion from to allow 2 drop-off spaces to allow 4 drop-off spaces, and then the condition change from the applicant shall apply with Public Works to allow 4 drop-off spaces. That doesn't require them to actually achieve those, but it allows them, it requires them to apply for more. So I think the points by my fellow commissioners are well taken on the drop-offs.
right.
I'm convinced on the,
All right, so we have a motion to amend the original motion to state that that the applicant shall apply with Public Works to allow 4 drop-off spaces as opposed to 2. So is there a second for that amendment? We have a motion and a second. Any discussion on the amendment? Commissioner Lipke-Peer, do you want to speak to that?
Yeah, I
or
just had a question for Commissioner Rockwell and Commissioner Kronzer. Just, are we then fine if the applicant applies but then gets denied for all 4? Does that have any impact on the variance that we're pending approval of? Because right now, like it was pointed out, they could apply and Public Works could say no to all 4, and then we would. Are we fine with them only having 4 parking spaces? Is my
Yeah,
question.
and Commissioner Rockwell.
I mean, I guess I defer to the actual kind of traffic decisions and traffic patterning to Public Works, because I don't really know. I want the applicant to be applying for more, and then Public Works being able to execute a traffic study, a parking study, and determine kind of the right amount there. But I think that if the right amount is more, having them apply for that is a good thing. That's my rationale there. I don't know, Commissioner Kronzer.
All right. Okay, so going back to the amendment, we have a motion and a second to require that the applicant apply with Public Works to allow for 4 drop-off spaces as opposed to 2. All in favor? Any opposed?
No.
So we have Sweezy opposed, otherwise that motion carries. Going back to the original motion, is there any further discussion? So now we have a motion to approve the variance to the minimum parking requirement with the condition that the applicant apply for 4 drop-off spaces. Commissioner Rockwell.
Just briefly on the 30 to 4, since a few folks came out for that, I do think this is in a good transit accessible place. I know that that there may be more than 4 people who drive, but I think I'm convinced that a lot of people will take transit, particularly if it's harder to park. In terms of permit parking, I would talk with city council member on that. We're the planning commission and we don't have authority over permit parking. But to explore that, you would need to talk to your city council member, who I believe is Andrew Johnson for this ward. I don't know if that's an option, and we don't have authority over it, but that's who you would talk to. That's who I would talk to.
All right, any further discussion on the original motion? Hearing none, we have a motion and a second to approve item B, the variance to the minimum parking requirement with an amendment to the staff language on the number of drop-off spaces. Clerk, please call the roll.
Coleman.
Aye.
Colville.
Aye.
Kronzer.
Aye.
Lipke-Peer.
No.
Rockwell.
Aye.
Schrader.
Aye.
Sweezy.
No.
5-2.
And that motion carries. Moving along to item C, Commissioner Kronzer.
Sure. I'd like to make a motion to approve staff recommendation of the variance to reduce the minimum required with the parking with the one stated condition.
So we have a motion and a second to approve item C, the variance to reduce the minimum required width of parking. Is there any discussion? Hearing none, clerk, please call the roll.
Coleman.
Aye.
Cogill.
Aye.
Kronzer.
Aye.
Libke.
Aye.
Rockwell.
Aye.
Schrader.
Aye.
Sweezy.
Aye.
7-0.
And that motion carries. Finally, item D, the site plan review. Commissioner Kronzer.
I'd like to make a motion to approve staff recommendation for site plan review with these 11 stated conditions.
And is there a second? We have a motion and a second to approve item D, the site plan review with the 11 stated conditions. Commissioner Lukey-Peer.
Yes, I had a question for staff regarding condition number 9. How many proposed bike parking spots are they, well, how many are they proposing? Because I don't see any in the plan.
If you zoom in on this, you can see that there's, I think, 6 proposed on the south side of the property line and 4 proposed on the north side on the property that's co-owned at 4008. So it's a total of 6 bike parking spaces, well, 10 total that will be available to folks dropping off their kids at the daycare.
And is that spelled out anywhere? So if this gets approved, it won't automatically somehow change to 2 or something? I mean, is it 10 somewhere in writing that will be enforceable? Since we're reducing the parking?
I think the minimum bicycle parking was 3, and so they're proposing 6. I don't have any conditions that would require them to keep it 6 if they didn't go below 3. If that makes sense.
Okay, in that case, can I make a friendly amendment to amend condition 9 to say to allow the proposed 10 bicycle parking, I don't know, stations or spaces there, thank you, in the public right of way, minimum.
All right, so we have a motion to amend condition 9 that the applicant shall apply for an encroachment permit to allow at least 10 bicycle parking spaces in the public right of way. Is there a second? Second. We have a motion and a second. Any discussion? Hearing none, we can vote on the amendment first, and all in favor. Aye. Any opposed? That motion carries. Moving back to the original motion. So we have a motion to approve item D, the site plan review with the 11 stated conditions, and amendment to condition 9 related to requiring at least 10 bicycle parking stalls. Is there any further discussion? Hearing none, clerk, please call the roll.
Coleman. Aye. Cogill.
Aye.
Kronzer.
Aye.
Libke.
Aye.
Rockwell.
Aye.
Schrader.
Aye.
Sweezy.
Aye.
7-0.
And that motion carries. That concludes our discussion on item 4. Our next item for discussion is item 5, 1501 Johnson Street Northeast. Staff is Ms. Smith.
Good evening, President Brown and Commissioners. This site is 1501 Johnson Street Northeast, and there are 2 additional attachments that were distributed tonight under item number 6, and that was a mistake. This is agenda item number 5. So this is the site. It is just to the southwest of the Quarry Shopping Center, across from Jim Lupien Park and Northeast Park. And then it's also adjacent to the Interstate 35W on-ramp. So it's a really unusual site. There's some additional public right-of-way in front of it that the applicant, at the time of the committee of the whole meeting, thought that they were going to vacate it, and they have since decided to not vacate that area. It's industrially zoned, I-1, and it has a 1-story industrial building on the site right now. So here's the zoning classification map. They're proposing 164 dwelling units, and this requires rezoning to add the industrial living overlay district to allow dwelling units. Also, a conditional use permit to increase the maximum height to a total of 6 stories at the tallest point of the building. The building is actually between 5 and 6 stories. Conditional use permit to allow dwellings and site plan review. So there have been a few changes since the committee of the whole meeting on November 27th. So there was some feedback that you wanted to see a taller building. So a portion of it is 6 stories now. They've added 9 dwelling units. They've also eliminated 53 parking spaces, somewhat in conjunction with the elimination of that right-of-way vacation application. So now they have 168 parking spaces for 164 dwelling units. Most of that is below grade, but there is other surface parking surrounding the site. They've also changed the materials and landscaping, and they've added crosswalks to the middle of the site and at the south end of the site. So the north would be on the left side of the page. So you can see that there are 2 access points. The northernmost access point would be ingress and egress from the drop-off area, but it would lead to a parking area that's one way, and it circulates throughout the site. And there is, right here is where the below grade parking could be accessed. It's one of the access points. There's also an access point off of the southernmost curb cut where you see a loading area, and that also gets into the below grade parking. Here's their landscaping plan. So they've been in communication with Public Works about ensuring that there is a tree planting plan and sidewalk plan. The sidewalk does not continue north of the curb cut. So in lieu of that, they're proposing 2 crosswalks. So one would be at the mid-block point, which leads to the park, and also at the south end of the site where there's a bus stop. Just below grade parking plan. There's also a ground floor patio, as you can see, that's on the 35W ramp side of the site. Let's keep going. So you'll see in the elevations there are 3 types of metal panel, and so that occupies most of the upper stories. There's brick veneer and rock face CMU. You can maybe see it a little bit better in the renderings. So you can see in the top left corner, this is how you'd see it from the park. There's the drop-off area. And then the bottom left images if you're traveling north on Johnson Street. So there are a number of items that require alternative compliance. So first, as we saw, the building placement is a little bit unusual because of that excess right-of-way. So they need alternative compliance for that, and also to have parking located between the building and the front lot line. And this is probably one of the items that the applicant would like to discuss tonight is retaining some of the surface parking closest to the drop-off area. And we're requiring as a recommended condition of approval that those 6 spaces be eliminated and that the drop-off area be paved in some other material other than asphalt, so some kind of decorative paver that still complies with our surfacing requirements. The principal entrance currently faces the drop-off area rather than Johnson, so we'd like to see either an additional entrance or moving the entrance so that there is an entrance facing Johnson directly, and then also a walkway that directly connects. Right now, it's not a completely direct connection. It's a little bit indirect. And then there is a substantial grade change on the site. And because of the below grade parking accommodations, they're below their minimum window requirement on the east elevation and also the south elevation that faces the parking lot. And we recommend granting alternative compliance. We'd like them to add a walkway for the northernmost row of parking to a building entrance. Right now there is none. And we'd like to see them comply with a minimum tree and shrub requirement. Not just for the overall site, but also in the corners of the parking areas, which may require reducing additional parking. And then we want to see a minimum 7-foot buffer and 3-foot screen. Actually, we'd like to recommend granting alternative compliance for the 7-foot buffer because there are some areas where there's actually a 40-foot buffer, but it's all right of way. So we find that to be reasonable as long as they can meet the 3-foot screening requirement along the parking and loading frontages. Linear tree requirement, they are amenable to this condition, complying with that. And then the minimum 50-foot tree requirement. So some other conditions that you'll find in the site plan review application is, relate to increasing the bicycle parking to a 1-to-1 ratio, trying to simplify the materials. So we'd like to see them eliminate one of the materials or reduce one of the 3 variations of metal panel. And limit the CMU that's proposed to what's actually proposed and not increase that. There are some parking spaces that don't comply with the minimum dimensions for a stall dimension or drive aisle, so we'd like those to be removed from the site plan. And then the loading area, maybe I'll go back to the site and floor plan, but the loading areas right now, right off of the southernmost curb cut, which based on the plans that we received, we didn't see that there was a direct connection to an elevator, and so we found that to be a little problematic, and we'd like that to be moved so that it's practical for people who are moving in and out of the building, and also reducing the size of the loading area to the minimum of 10 feet by 25 feet should help them actually reduce some of their screening requirements. And I'll flip back to the loading area just so I can maybe get a better view of that for you. So yeah, the loading area would be right down here. And so the applicant is, I think they're also not amenable to this condition, so maybe they could help explain, what the plan is for move in, move out. And I will turn it over to them unless I can answer any questions.
Right. And commissioners, are there any questions of staff? Commissioner Kronzer.
I have a question about the crosswalks.
Sure.
What is Public Works' feedback to these 2 crosswalks at non-signalized intersections?
Yes, so this has been a subject of discussion. There is a TDMP that's in progress right now, so we have received a draft and we have not fully reviewed it, but in our preliminary discussions with Public Works, because the intersection at the northernmost point of this site is actually being studied right now by MnDOT, they're actively studying it and they expect to have some improvements done within the next 5 to 10 years. Public Works is comfortable with the applicant delaying this because there might be a different plan that MnDOT implements or MnDOT and the city implements. So rather than requiring the applicant to, for instance, put in a sidewalk and a crosswalk at that intersection, they felt that the crosswalk with flashers mid-block would be appropriate for getting residents from this site across to the sidewalk that's currently in place. And then if you wanted to go to the quarry, for instance, you would be able to use the intersection that's more north, but north of Johnson.
Mm-hmm. But so Public Works, with what we see in front of us, they're supportive of?
They're comfortable with that, yeah.
And is Public Works constructing those, or is the applicant constructing
The
those?
applicant would be constructing these amenities.
Okay. The second question is, where is the entrance now that's into the lobby office space? I see one door that in-swings. Is that the location of the proposed entrance? That
Right
there?
here, that's the entrance.
Okay.
Yes.
Thank you.
Right. Any further questions of staff? Commissioner Cogill.
Yes, thank you. Question, but the width of the roadway that goes around the building, is that the determination of the applicant, or was that Public Work? It's 14 feet wide.
Yes, this site plan was developed by the applicant, so our job as staff is to react to their site plan.
Right. Okay. And what is the? What was my one other question? So the recommendation for RFB crosswalk beacon, is that was the recommended approach from Public Works over a stop sign or any other, was anything else
It's not,
considered?
oh, sorry.
Yeah, sorry.
It's not final. So as I mentioned, there's a travel demand management plan that's currently in draft form, and so we'll need to work closely with Public Works, traffic, and the applicant to make sure that all of the features of that crosswalk are sufficient in our mind and safe.
Thanks.
If there are no further questions of staff, I will open the public hearing on this item. I'd like to ask the applicant to speak first, so please come to the microphone, state your name and address for the record.
Good afternoon. My name is Link Wilson. I'm the architect for the project. Also with me is Steve Dunbar from Ivy Development. We're both working with the property owner. My address is 1301 American Boulevard in Bloomington. I want to be very brief, but at the same time, I do want to, take a minute to thank staff for a phenomenal job. Mei Ling has been terrific to work with. Everybody at Public Works. This is an extremely complicated site, and so we've appreciated everybody's patience. As well, we presented to Committee of the Whole, and we have made significant changes since that time. As Mei Ling had stated, the one portion of the building is taller, but also the north wing is shorter subsequent to that Committee of the Whole meeting, which I think improved the project greatly. I think that any time that you have a site like this, and I'll just point to it, that is extremely odd in nature, fish-shaped site, for lack of a better term. It has significant grade changes as we move from south to north about 8 feet. And then any time that you're on an urban edge or an edge between two disparate pieces of a community, you're going to have some type of request for variance. I don't think it's just me as an architect that always asks for some type of leeway. But in the blue packet, really what I want to focus in on tonight are just items 7 and 8. We are in complete agreement with everything else in the report, and we'll make all staff changes and recommendations. Let me just go through zoning code. Let's see here. I'll go to the next slide. I just wanted to reinforce what this site is currently today. It's a warehouse. It's not very. It's very unsightly. I think the neighborhood is really trending in a positive direction, and I just don't see that this site is reflecting where the neighborhood is going. We hope that you feel that our proposal is, but we're certainly looking forward to changes on this site. So again. Just as Mei Ling had showed, we've rotated the site. The previous view was north up. This view is north to the left. And I wanted to comment, Commissioner Kronzer, on that sidewalk. And I want to make it really clear that we are committed to building a sidewalk that does connect to the quarry, and so that I would ask that you make that a condition of tonight's approval. If it's not clear, we're absolutely committed. It's just that we need to continue to work with MnDOT that owns this property. They are in a gateway study period right now. We're hoping that they complete their study soon and then continue to work with Public Works. I'll go to the next slide and then come back, because I think it's really important to understand that all of these trees that you see here, they're existing, and we want to preserve all those trees because we think that it creates a great buffer, a great connection to the park. We have our sidewalk against the curb here because we feel that we can then preserve all the existing trees that are on the south side of that entrance. So we're committed to continuing that parking as it goes north, and so I want to absolutely make that a condition of tonight's approval. Just a little bit of background, just as Mei Ling had stated, we see the primary entrance to the site on the north side of the entrance, and then one-way underground parking. We have 164 underground parking stalls, I apologize, 146 underground parking stalls, 164 total apartment units. And then the site drive goes around the site one way until we get just to the south side. And so really item 7 from the blue sheet here, or I'm sorry, item 8, where we have a little difference of opinion with staff, is that we would like for any move-in, move-out to happen on the south end of the site. It is true that we have elevators here at the center side of the site, but our experience has been that you can park a semi here, but probably that's only going to happen 1 or 2 times a year. Usually it's going to be a smaller vehicle. There's room for a semi or a smaller vehicle. They'll use the garage door or even the person door that's there and then wheel their belongings to 2 elevators that are at the center of the building. Along the MnDOT property, we're completely aligned with staff about how to treat that. We have a very, very large outdoor recreation space. I think we're aligned with that. And then at the main entrance, I think this is just really our only other point, which is item number 7. And that is that we have a very active space that's 2 stories, and that's our entrance lobby that faces out onto Johnson. And then we just, because of the interior, we'd like to see that entrance backed off of that activity space. It'll be lit at night, activated, connected to the park, but it's also a place where you could pick up Uber or Lyft right at that location, and we're absolutely committed to making a change to change the material. Right now we show asphalt right here. We're committed to make a change to a colored concrete or paver at that location. So I think we're aligned with staff. I think where we have just a difference of operational opinion, you can see that turnaround and drop off here. We have 2 accessible parking spaces that are closest to the door. We've presented this 4 times, actually, to 2 different neighborhood committees. I think that we have full support from neighborhood. But one of those supporters, actually 2 of them, were emphatic that they wanted to see accessible parking stalls. And so 2 of those 6 stalls are accessible. And really for security of the building, we like to have some parking right at the front, but also just operationally to lease up, there's an advantage to having at least a few stalls. But also there's no street parking on Johnson. And so again, this is not on an urban core, it's an urban edge. I'm the architect of record for the Groveland and Loring Park, for the Paxson, which is on First Avenue North. Both of those projects, we have absolutely no street parking in front. And those work in those urban core areas. Both of those projects, though, have almost the exact loading locations on the back side of the building as we're proposing today. And so really in closing, and all the 3D drawings were shown previously, but I think that we've tried as best we can to preserve all of the trees along the front. They're screening those 6 stalls, but operationally we feel that we need them. And then addressing the street by tree preservation and facade change on the park side. And I think with that, I'll just leave it for questions that you may have of me.
Commissioner Lukey here.
Yeah, just really quickly, the condition 8 that you were discussing, are you opposed to the condition just because of the location, or are you also opposed to it because of the minimum dimensions required?
Great question, Commissioner. We're not opposed to changing the width. at all. So it's really just the second part of the sentence, shall be relocated to an area of the site. We'd like to maintain that location, but we're willing to make it more narrow. And the reason why is we have two ways for cars to get in and out. So if that is blocked during a move-in, then people can use the northern car entrance.
So if this was reduced, would that prevent people from using the northern car entrance? Is that what you're saying?
No, I think,
Or is it just a convenience factor?
It is a convenience factor. I think that the only other place on the site to do something like this is right along in this area, and then we're losing a tremendous amount of site parking. And again, I think that it's our goal to be connected from a pedestrian environment. We have 2 bus stops that are at the south side of the site, but we have no street parking, and so we're trying to, from a vehicular standpoint, be very self-contained and to be able to have tremendous tree preservation, but also to have 23 site stalls, as opposed to we'd lose 6 on the front, it'd be 17 site stalls, or then again move in to eliminate more site stalls.
So the stalls on the east side, if I was, for example, parking there, is there a pedestrian path to get in the building, or am I going to be walking in the private street to get around the building to find a way in?
If you have a fob, then you can come in through the garage. Okay. So if you are a guest, then you're going to have somebody meet you. So it really is more for resident parking on the east side of the site. But how am I walking? Am I walking in like a drive aisle, or am I walking on a sidewalk, I guess is my point. There is a sidewalk.
Okay, it's hard to tell on the plan if there's a way to get in the building from back there.
There is a sidewalk, but I think for guests, parking in those 6 stalls on the west side of the site is really where you're going to be if you're a guest.
No, true, unless there's 8 guests. Thanks.
Commissioner Cogill.
Couple of questions. I can't tell the plans. What's the width of the curb cuts?
I think we've narrowed those down just to 24 feet as we enter the site.
Are they both? Is it a one way, or are they both?
So you can enter and exit both of those, but it's really a one-way. It's better just to use this image. So you could come in, circle around, and come back out. But once you start to drive north, then you're going to drive all the way around the building to get out. And then the same way at the south end, it's 24 feet wide, so that you could come into the underground garage and you could leave the underground garage. So there's kind of a two-way. The first, let's just say, 70 feet of both entrances. But then when you get beyond it to the north, it's just one way.
So is there any sort of guideline or regulation that requires you to have both entrance and exit on both of those curb cuts, or could it be a one-way all the way, or you could only enter on one side? Is that a possibility, or is there some sort of state or city regulation that requires?
There are none that I know of.
Great. And then could you talk to me a little bit about the concept of the kind of cul-de-sac entrance space? Is that just the kind of entrance, like a drop-off pickup kind of space?
It really is. It's not large enough for, let's say, a fire truck to, make a circle. If there were any emergency vehicles, again, they would go all the way around the site. So it's really just for a friend to pick you up, or the use of Uber, Lyft, or taxi, which we're seeing more and more and more of.
Great. And my final question is about the location of the lobby office and the lounge, and whether or not there's any flexibility to switching those so that the entrance could be on the corner adjacent to the street, or if there's any thought about not having that be the case.
I think that there's flexibility. If that was really important to the commission, I think that we could work with that. I think this image shows it best. We like that tall 2-story space, and then being able to walk past it and have offices to your left, but then this really large lounge to your right. So now just functionally we're having people just walk through that, coffee space that we've created for morning or kind of lounge space at night. Now we're having people, instead of walk by it and look at it or have a gathering in that space that again is looking out over the park, and that I think at night would be very interesting for anyone walking by or driving by. We're now bifurcating that space, so that was our resistance to change.
That makes sense. Thank you.
Commissioner Kronzer.
Yeah, I want to talk a little bit more about the entry too. What are the grades doing? Does this illustration represent what the grades are at this corner? Is it pretty flat?
The grades, this is extremely accurate. What's happening though, when we enter, we've created a flat space, and then we're actually driving over the top of underground parking as we move to our left or to the north. So that's remaining very flat. And then we get past, I'll go back, we get past these 6 stalls that we're requesting, and then it starts to go down. That gets you to the underground parking. So that then when we're on this access drive, and that's why we liked it, that way that when I'm on first floor and I'm looking out, those parking stalls are, 9 feet below me in my deck.
So when we're on Johnson, right at that curb cut, it's pretty flat to the main part of the building?
Correct. And then it starts to drop all the way to the quarry.
Okay.
I think
One
there's
last
maybe
question.
18-foot drop.
I think I heard you say you'd like another condition. Is that to... you're required to construct a sidewalk going from the curb cut to the intersection of Johnson and Johnson.
Correct. I'm not sure that it's clear right now, and so I think to make that a third condition, that this development team is committed to find a way, working with Public Works and ultimately with MnDOT. Right now, MnDOT, we can't even have a conversation with them because they say, well, we're in our study period, but I would recommend making that addition.
And Commissioner Lupke here.
Just a couple of things real quick. So I was looking at the lobby where the entrance is kind of coming in off the lobby, not necessarily the office anyway. And I'm wondering, I think your point about Ubers and Lyfts and all that, people dropping off is great for that door you have there, but I don't see where having a second door or set of doors off that same, circulation path right at the northern side of that lobby is necessarily being precluded through the plan. So I'm wondering, is it a situation if we add it? I mean, are you opposed to kind of maintaining the 2 doors, or would you prefer us just to pick one?
Right. I think from a security standpoint, we're going to live with whatever your commission decides. So if it is to have an entrance directly off of Johnson, we'd add a little bit of sidewalk, right here. But we wouldn't eliminate this sidewalk here because you'd still probably want to get picked up right just a little bit in front of where that white car is.
And then my second question really quick was in looking at the site plan as opposed to this, I think this rendering illustrates it really well, is it wasn't clear this one, it's actually illustrating the other thing. So right where the sidewalk runs into that curvy sidewalk that leads to where all the, and it only go to the west till you get to the street.
Okay, yep.
Boom. Okay, so if I was walking along Johnson and I got to there and I wanted to cross, I was wondering if it shows on the rendering the sidewalk at least continuing through the curb cuts right there to at least, I know you're not doing the rest of the sidewalk on the other side, but just so you're not tearing up curb cuts later, would you be willing to just put those in just to keep
Absolutely.
it all super?
Right.
Thank you.
Okay, any further
I know I've
questions?
really made it complex for you this evening, and I apologize.
Any further questions of the applicant? If there are none, we can see if anyone else would like to speak on this item. Is there anyone else who would like to speak on item 5? Yes, and please state your name and address for the record.
Yeah, I'm Neil Scott, and we're on 15th and Johnson. We're probably the closest house to the project, and I just wanted to say we're excited about it. That I think it's, this is a neighborhood that's been struggling most of my life for the last 60 years, it's really going upward, as the gentleman said. It's on the uptick now, and this kind of indicates that. And I think it's a real plus to put something like this in the neighborhood. It's gonna, it says you're coming back. So that's my only comment.
All right, thank you.
Okay, thank you.
And is there anyone else who would like to speak on this item? Seeing no one, I'll close the public hearing. And commissioners, we have a total of 4 applications before us. Are there any further questions, or would someone like to start things off with a motion? Commissioner Lupke-Peer.
I'd like to move the rezoning.
We have a motion to approve item A, the rezoning. Also have a second. Is there any discussion on that? Hearing none, we have a motion and a second to approve item A. Clerk, please call the roll.
Coleman. Aye. Colgill.
Aye.
Kranzer.
Aye.
Lipke-Peer.
Aye.
Rockwell.
Aye.
Schrader.
Aye.
Sweezy. Aye. 7-0.
That motion carries. Moving along, Commissioner Lupke-Peer.
I'd like to move condition B, the conditional use permit to allow dwellings in the industrial living overlay district with the one stated condition.
We have a motion to approve item B, the conditional use permit for dwellings in the industrial living overlay district with the one stated condition. Is there a second? We have a motion and a second. Any discussion? Hearing none, clerk, please call the roll.
Coleman. Aye. Colgill.
Aye.
Kranzer.
Aye.
Lipke-Peer.
Aye.
Rockwell.
Aye.
Schrader.
Aye.
Sweezy. Aye. 7-0.
And that motion carries. Commissioner Lupke-Peer.
I'd like to move item C, the conditional use permit to increase the maximum height of the building with the 3 stated conditions.
We have a motion to approve item C, the conditional use permit for building height with 3 stated conditions. Is there a second?
Second.
We have a motion and a second. Any discussion? Hearing none, clerk, please call the roll.
Coleman. Aye. Colgill.
Aye.
Kranzer.
Aye.
Lipke-Peer.
Aye.
Rockwell.
Aye.
Schrader.
Aye.
Sweezy.
Aye.
7-0.
That motion carries. Finally, item D, Commissioner Lupke-Peer.
I'd like to move item D, the site plan review with 13 stated conditions, however, making a modification to condition 8 by striking the latter half of the sentence, starting with the word and.
All right, we have a motion to approve item D, the site plan review with the 13 stated conditions with a modification to condition 8, removing the second part of the sentence related to relocating the loading space. Is there a second? We have a motion and a second. Any discussion? Commissioner Kranzer.
Yeah, I'd like to add a friendly amendment to amend condition number 5 related to the main entry, and I'll maybe read that for your consideration. The principal entry shall be, the conditional entry into the ground floor lobby lounge shall be moved to the west side of the building facing Johnson Street Northeast. The principal entrance shall be connected to the public walk in the drop-off area with a small hardscape plaza. The final plan shall be revised to include clear, well-lit walkways of at least 4 feet in width connecting building entrances to the adjacent public sidewalks and all site parking facilities. Just really the notion that I think we should orient this building towards the street and the crosswalks and the bus stops. It's still allowing that automobile connection, but really making sure like, hey, the 4 buses here and I could hop on that and be in downtown in 10 minutes. So I think that's a small thing. I think the interior space you could work through and get that resolved just fine. But I think that's a really important step on this project.
So is the intent of your friendly amendment to minimize and reduce it to 1 entrance instead of 2?
At least the principal entrance. I mean, the applicant has said they would do 1 anyway, so presumably that would be 1.
I guess I would be amenable to that. If I don't mind them having a secondary entrance, but I do concur with you on the principal entrance being located on the street.
Maybe ask staff. That won't limit them putting in a second means of egress? No. Okay.
Super.
All right, so we have a motion to amend condition 5 related to the principal entrance, moving that to the west side of the building, connecting it to the public way with a plaza. Is there a second? We have a motion and a second. Any discussion on that amendment? Hearing none, all in favor of the amendment? Any opposed? And that motion carries unanimously. Going back to the original motion, is there any further discussion on that? Hearing none, we have a motion and a second to approve item D, the site plan review, with some changes to condition 8 related to the location of the loading space, an amendment to condition 5 regarding the principal entrance of the building. And if there's no discussion, no further discussion, clerk, please call the roll.
Coleman.
Aye.
Colgill.
Aye.
Kranzer.
Aye.
Lipke-Peer.
Aye.
Rockwell.
Aye.
Schrader.
Here.
Sweezy.
Yes.
President?
Sweezy.
No, that's Congress.
7-0.
All right, and that motion carries. That concludes our discussion on item 5. Our final item for discussion tonight is item 6, 740 South 4th Street. Staff is Ms. Dvorak.
Good evening, Commissioners. This is for the Block 1 residential development. This is the 5th, and I believe the final phase of the Downtown East project that started a number of years ago. And most of you were here, I think, for all iterations of the project. And this is the last undeveloped parcel. And this is going to be a 342-unit residential building. There's a conditional use permit to amend the planned unit development, site plan review, and then a registered land survey. This is on the corner of 4th Street South and Park Avenue. This has been at a committee of the whole meeting in the past. As I had indicated, it was 342 units. It's 25 stories tall. There's 120 parking spaces in the building. Access to the parking is from 3 different means of egress. One is off of 4th Street, one is off of Park Avenue, and then the other one is from the existing parking garage that currently exists on the block. The access here off of 4th Street is to the loading space, and then also some at-grade parking spaces. Access to the access off of Park Avenue leads to underground parking, and then access to the garage is through the garage. They do have an amenity deck over the parking garage, so they own the air rights over that parking garage, and they are going to exercise their rights to develop a portion of those air rights over the parking garage into an amenity space for the residents of the building. The ground floor, this is that first floor plan. One item that we had at committee of the whole, one conversation that we had at committee of the whole, was to activate the ground floor. And if you recall, there had been parking spaces in this area with a narrow walkway, I would say, a narrow space. In that area, they have
Hillary, can you move that up slightly?
Oh, sorry.
Thank you.
Sorry. They have turned that into a commercial space, as was discussed at Planning Commission Committee of the Whole. Yet to be determined what use would go in there. Excuse me. I'm going to just show you the images of the building. They do have 2 items of alternative compliance that are needed. One is a portion of the building, the main entrance to the building is located further than 8 feet from 4th Street, or that front property line. In order to get a larger canopy, the building is set back for weather protection. And then the amount of active function on Park Avenue is less than the 78, it's 68%. All of that frontage is dedicated to active space except for the driveway or the garage door, which is 23 feet. We are recommending that you grant alternative compliance for both of those items. And then here are the images. These were provided in your packets.
I apologize. The coloring is a little darker. Maybe it's my shadow. That is the building when you're looking from the Commons. This is an image of the building when looking from when you're looking southwest. We're looking from the northeast, and then this is a building when you're looking east on 4th Street. And then just to show you the elevations of the building, which are also in the packets. So that is the building on 4th Street. And then this is your Park Avenue elevation. This is the elevation that is on the river side of the building, or the north side of the building, and then the parking garage is in the foreground. And then this is your elevation if you're on the east side. We are recommending approval of all 3 applications before you, subject to standard conditions, I would say, except for the conditional use permit. For number 2, highlights and adds as conditions the amenities that they are proposing through the PUD. And I will stand for any questions.
Okay, Commissioners, are there any questions of staff? Hearing none, I'll open the public hearing on this item. We can see if the applicant has anything to add to the staff presentation, and if so, you can come to the microphone, state your name and address for the record.
Tony Barranco, 4439 Fremont Avenue South in Minneapolis. President Brown, members of the Plan Commission, I'll be very brief with my comments. As Hillary said, this is the last phase, our 5th phase of the Downtown East development. Very excited about finishing up this last piece. This piece is an 18,000 square foot, I don't want to call it remnant piece, it's always been an important part of the project, but the parking ramp that was built for the MSFA was an urgent matter that was part of the delivery of the overall stadium condition. And when we built the ramp, we were required to reinforce the ramp in preparation for a building. And so what you see is planned, has always been planned as part of the project, but we've had to deal with some really tight conditions within the project itself. Very excited to be bringing forward a residential tower. We think it is going to be a signature showpiece to the end of the Commons, and obviously fitting in with the light rail line and the amenities that are rich in that part of the neighborhood. The other thing about it, we've been really thoughtful about not overbuilding parking, being on the fact that we were literally interconnected with a 1,614 stall public parking ramp. We wanted to best leverage the benefits of that ramp in light of the fact that we had to build a building adjacent to and abutting that piece. So our building really comes straight out of that 18,000 square foot corner piece, and we'd be thrilled to answer any questions that you might have. Joining me tonight, I've got Josh Ekstrand from the architecture team. I've got Tom Raywalt from our civil team, and my co-developer and colleague Joe Paris is here, so we've got you covered on all fronts. Thanks.
And Commissioners, any questions of the applicant? Commissioner Kronzer.
So the ground floor commercial space, there seems to be stairs ramp connecting that to the lobby of the building. Is that a requirement to have those connected in your mind, or could that commercial space grow without those ramp and stairs in that location? It seems like that takes a lot of real estate up. That's just getting people up. Like people could walk outside a couple feet, get into that retail space if they needed to.
President Brown, Commissioner Kronzer, I'll take a stab at it and I'll have Josh clean up what I don't get right. But the property itself has elevation changes. You go from Plan West, if you consider Park as west, to east on Chicago. And we need to make up grade as we go from east to west. And so we've been trying to balance both the maximization of that retail space with making up that grade as we go, and finding that balance has been hard for us to do. And so in that sense, I think we've got a small grade change that we've accommodated the best way we can while still making a marketable piece of retail space kind of in the mid block there.
I have one other question. Could you go to the rendering from the east? I was really picky, but since you're standing here, I thought I'd also take 30 seconds. So, other side, that's the west.
The other east?
Looking from the east. The way the east elevation with the precast, the light stone kind of stops, those two piers at the corner seem like they're hanging out there. If you could send that back to your team and look to see if you could connect those or do something. It looks like that stone is really odd. Yeah, right there. That just looks really odd to me. Okay, I'm done.
All right. Any further questions of the applicant? If there are none, I know we have at least one other speaker on this item, so anyone who would like to speak, if you could come to the microphone and state your name and address for the record.
Good evening, everyone. My name is Sean Billig, and I live at 250 Park Avenue, which is a couple blocks from this development. I'd like to say that I'm really happy to see that this is happening. I'm really happy to see that it's residential rather than commercial. But I'd like to ask the commission to consider a couple things. One is some architectural elements. The rendering that was released by Ryan, I think it was late November or so, had some real nice depth to it. So there was a cornice at the top of the building. The kind of yellow areas in the front of the building were sort of extruded to meet the edge of the balconies, which look quite nice, which I can attempt to display here on the laptop. I don't know if this will work. Yeah, so left is before and right is after. I think the earlier rendering is quite a bit nicer looking, personally. Particularly here on the top, it's very flat, a bit ugly, personal opinion. I'm also a bit concerned about the curb cut on, I guess, the two curb cuts. The Park Avenue side gets a lot of foot traffic, particularly after events. We already have a huge curb cut for the parking ramp that this building is connected to. So it'd be really nice if we could just make use of that, eliminate the additional cut. That would potentially also allow the retail space to move to the corner closest to the park, which I think would be a huge improvement for that location. And that retail space could potentially be a bit larger with that move. That's all.
All right, thank you. And is there anyone else who would like to speak on this item? Seeing no one, I will close the public hearing. And commissioners, we have a total of 3 applications before us on this item. Are there any further questions, or would someone like to start things off with a motion? Commissioner Lupke here.
I have a question for the applicant. Actually, just based on the testimony you just heard, maybe you can just address those design changes and explain why.
Good evening, Commissioners. I'm Josh Ekstrand, Director of Design at Ryan Companies. And to address, so the 2 items, or the 3 items that I heard, I guess, were the depth of the facade and kind of how that change occurred and what the reasoning behind that is, and then the curb cuts and sort of why they're located there. So to address the depth of the facade, I think that there's the depth actually hasn't changed in the relationship between, I don't have a reference to point to, but between the main plane of the kind of glass box that goes up and over the top and the front face of the precast. What has changed is the relationship of the balconies within that to the front face. Originally, we were looking to do recessed balconies and have those stay behind it. And as we looked through that and thought more about how the units were going to be impacted by that, it actually became concerning for both unit light entering into them. We have several narrow units that get very dark at the back of them. If we have the balconies fully recessed, you just don't get enough light into them. And it limits the amount of views that you get out of the unit, both from within the unit and out on the balcony. So we pulled those partially out of the facade, but still kept some depth between where that door exists versus the precast at the exterior.
So just to clarify, you're saying there's more square footage in the units because you pulled the balconies out a little. So that plane that we're talking about hasn't changed. It's that the location of the balcony within the plane has moved forward?
That is correct.
And then just a follow-up real quick on the facades for those buff-colored elements. Are they flush with the glazing that's next to it, or are they actually proud by some sort of 6 inches, 10 inches? I don't, something to make some sort of shadow line or indicate materiality?
All right. So, try to point to the planes as clearly as I can. So, this plane is proud of the primary glazing plane that runs behind it, and the precast in these vertical columns that are separated by the balconies is about 16 inches proud of that. So that's how those balconies are partially recessed from that. So it's a little bit hard to see at this scale.
But from the glazing to the first thing, as you said, like a 16-inch variation? Okay.
Yep, that's right.
And are there any further questions, or would someone like
Sorry,
to-
interrupt him before you could explain
Commissioner
the parking really quickly. You were explaining your second point. I was interrupting you.
Yes, the reasoning for the 2 curb cuts. So the limitations of the site are such that we can't get parking on the first floor and have access below grade from one curb cut. And the curb cut on Park actually exists today. That was put in as part of the original development. So it's there, just not going anywhere currently. So we would use that one again. So we're really asking for one additional curb cut off of 4th, which allows us to do the off-street loading within the building footprint.
Okay. And would someone like to start off the discussion with a motion? 3 applications before us. The first is a conditional use permit for a planned unit development, followed by a site plan review and registered land survey. Commissioner Kronzer.
Make a motion to approve conditional use permit with the 3 stated conditions.
We have a motion and a second to approve item A, the conditional use permit with the 3 stated conditions. Is there any discussion? Hearing none, clerk, please call the roll.
Coleman? Aye. Coghill?
Aye.
Kranzer?
Aye.
Lipke Pier? Aye. Rockwell?
Aye.
Schrader?
Aye.
Squeezy? Aye. 7-0.
That motion carries. And Commissioner Kronzer.
I'll make a motion to move both the site plan review and the registered land survey. The site plan review approval with 3 stated conditions.
And we have a motion and a second to approve items B and C. The site plan review and registered land survey. Item B has 3 stated conditions. Is there any discussion? Hearing none, clerk, please call the roll.
Coleman? Aye. Coghill?
Aye.
Kranzer?
Aye.
Lipke Pier? Aye. Rockwell?
Aye.
Schrader?
Aye.
Squeezy? Aye. 7-0.
And that motion carries. That concludes our discussion on item 6. Also concludes our business for today. We have committee of the whole this Thursday. Our next meeting is March 25th, and we are adjourned.